Hello, and welcome back to the Trauma-Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm so happy that you're joining me today. I have a really special episode for you. I cannot believe I have had the chance to speak with her today. But today's interview, we're talking with Dr. Edith Eger, who is just such a beautiful writer, and she's an eminent psychologist, also one of the few remaining Holocaust survivors old enough to actually remember life in the camps. A colleague of Viktor Frankl, Dr. Eger has worked with veterans, military personnel, victims of physical and mental trauma. She lives in La Jolla, California, and is the author of the best-selling and award-winning books, The Choice and The Gift. She's also the author of the new book, The Ballerina of Auschwitz. And she has a lot to share today about understanding trauma and overcoming it, how to hold on to hope and foster a more positive mindset, even amidst the worst of circumstances. She's joined today by her grandson, Jordan Engel, who is her grandson and collaborator and the co-founder of Soul Search, which is the home of all of Dr. Eger's online courses. He's also the editor of The Ballerina of Auschwitz and is joining us for today's conversation. They make a great team. I am so honored to have had the opportunity to speak with them about this. You guys know how important these topics are to me. And yeah, enough of me talking. Without further ado, let's get to this episode. Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Jordan, Dr. Eger, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Very wonderful to have our experience and hopefully have more productive times to spend together.
And just thank you so much, Dr. Eger, for sharing your story. As I was reading the book, I was wondering, what made you feel that this was the right time to share this story?
Many people told me for many years to write and write. And then finally, I got a call from Philip Zimbardo, and he was at Stanford, and he said, I had dinner last night with all these survivors, but there was no woman there. We need a woman's voice. And that's how I came up with the book called The Choice.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Let me also fill in a little bit of the history of The Choice leading to the Ballerina of Auschwitz, which is Edie has a dream that I have seen from her from when I was a young guy in high school, and Edie would come and speak to our school, and everybody was in rapt attention, sitting on the edge of their seat, because Edie's story is one that you can't, when you hear her speak, especially if you're a high schooler, it changes your whole idea of life. And so she would come in and give these talks, and it was clear that that age group really resonated with Edie's story. And Edie, you had always told me, I want to write a book for young adults. I want to write a book for young adults because they are the future ambassadors for peace.
Younger children, they're not really an adult until you're 25. So I think we need to listen more to their voice and let them know that they are wonderful people for the future. And hopefully one of them will become the president of the United States. And to think big, because if you think small, you have to be very careful not to be too small, because then you may end up passing somebody by you and not even look at you, and you get overlooked, and then you're complaining. So be assertive, but not aggressive.
Exactly. There's so many lessons that Edie gives to us all, but in particular to connect with that young adult audience. And that was why we took parts of the choice and created, and Edie beautifully put together a book that is meant to take young adults on a journey. And it's not a self-help book. It's truly a story in its rawest, most inspiring way of taking you from where she began in her early teens through Auschwitz, through survival, and then ultimately discovering how to find love again. And that story it's on the edge of your seat. You don't stop. It reminds me of how it felt to sit in and watch her in high school at those big gymnasiums when she would just tell her story and everybody was waiting to hear the next part.
I think the ambassadors are very important people for peace, and I do everything impossible to support the young who are no longer children, not really truly adults, and kind of being in between, and let them know that they are the future and they can really do tremendous amount to hopefully that you know that you are you and I am myself, and we're going to be much stronger together than without.
Something that you shared in the book that I think is so relevant for these younger generations is this idea of needing to perform for love and approval. I would love to hear a little bit about how that showed up in your life and maybe how you see that show up in younger generations today.
When I arrived in Auschwitz, my father looked at the sign, Arbeit macht frei, that work makes you free, it interprets to that. And my father was very, very optimistic that we're just going to be here a little while and then we're going to go home. But that didn't turn out like that. So when I was interviewed by a former prisoner who now became the capo and really took out the anger on us who came in 1944, the Hungarian Jews were not picked up until 44. And there was a Swedish man who tried to write a lot of visas and to get people not to have to go to Auschwitz. But I think it was scary. And today I beg parents not to spoil their children because they give up very quickly. They want everything to come from the outside and develop your inner strength. That's going to be with you as long as you live.
Thank you for sharing that.
I hope to live that way, yes. I get up in the morning very, very early, like 5:30, and do something. It's called a shake and bake. I call it. It's a machine that helps you to breathe better. My lungs can use a lot of help.
Something that I think you write about so eloquently and that I wanted to make sure I asked you about is this topic of trauma and how people experience trauma. And, I know that there's so many different types of trauma, right? There's, a term we use a lot today is big T, little t trauma. But, there's so many ways that can show up for someone. And, from your perspective, what would you want people to know about how understanding your trauma can be an important step in keeping it from taking control over your life?
Well, why don't I put it back to you and tell me, if you were me, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, that'd be hard for me to do because I've had a very different experience from you. I know my traumas have been what they are. I've spoken very openly, publicly about them, but I know in my own life, a lot of it has been about, and this is just something that I find useful, is really focusing on taking responsibility and acknowledging it and looking at what I can do to take care of myself so that I can be there for other people. But also a lot of that involves recognizing when it comes up and being aware of the signs and putting different support systems into place to help come back. I call it come back to baseline. My background is in clinical work, so I always use terms like that. But I think, I've worked with many people who do have different degrees of trauma that show up in their life. And I think awareness is really important as a first step, but then developing the tools to how to respond when it does come up, I think is very helpful. But that's just been, my own experience. And as a human on this planet who has, like many, had to deal with certain kinds of trauma, nothing to the degree of being in a camp. But yeah, that's what I would say to that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Edie, how have you used, or how have you allowed trauma not to keep you from your purpose, but to give you strength to take it on?
I realized my limitations. I only have so much power outside of me, but they could never touch my spirit. And I think that helped me a great deal to pray for the enemies. I wanted to pray so the Nazis would not really be cruel to us, because sometimes our own people were more cruel than the Nazis were. I think some of the women were very compassionate to other women. Not too many, but I did experience that. We worked in a factory, and we had to cut threads, and it was actually the thing that I did when I came to America. I worked in a factory cutting threads of little boxer shirts, so I was experienced from the camp. I think everything was an opportunity to discover traits we never thought we're going to have. I think it was very important for us not to get into this us and them, and, not to be idealistic, but to be more good people who live in the day and hoping for the best to come. And actually that included a lot of praying for the enemies.
And when you came to the States, or even just after you left the camp, did you find that it was work to maintain that kind of a outlook, or did that come naturally to you at that point?
After you survived and you were reunited with your sisters and you began to take on relatively normal life, was it a challenge for you to keep that same mentality that you had held on to survive?
Everything happened moment by moment, and you never knew what's going to happen. 4:00 in the morning, you're standing in line a couple hours. I don't know why they had to, but they told us also, if you're not feeling well, just stay behind the barrack, and then they're going to take us to a hospital. There was no hospital. We never saw those people again. So we had to learn very quickly what not to do more than what to do. I know that you wanted to run away or you want to punch the person, like Jolla Gabor did with the police, slapped him in the face. It's a good Hungarian thing to do. No, I had to learn very quickly to be seen as little as possible. But when Mengele asked me to dance, because the girls threw me in front of him to dance for him, and of course I did the best dance I ever did in my life, and I did the high kick for him. Those days I was still very well equipped to do that. And my daughter husband got the Nobel Prize in economics many years ago, but he was invited now to Chile. And I arrived, and the president was reading my book. I said, "Look what I'm reading, it's Edith's book." And so I was taken as well in Chile, where all the Nazis went after the war or during the war, and what happened there. I think it's a great thing that teenagers are interested and much more valued than we think they are.
Mm.
But they are. They want to be part of our history and doing everything to be sure that will never happen again.
And, from your own experience or, what you might share with someone else, if someone is looking to regain that sense of inner peace or reconnect to, wanting to stay in a positive mindset, as they're processing the effects of the trauma that they've been through, what would you recommend for them?
They controlled many, many things, but they could never take away my dreams, my hopes, and the way I provided to myself, even though I don't like it, it's inconvenient, and not but, and it's temporary, and I can survive it. It's a no, yes, but, it's yes, and I am here. So it's one day at a time, kind of a philosophy to do everything I take, not personally, because these children were brainwashed to hate me, and that really was happening. I remember talking to people about, I went to this Ruth Steakhouse many, many years ago, and I was walking on cobblestones that I had this way of immediately identifying myself, how the children were teasing us and spitting at us as we were walking from Auschwitz down to Mauthausen, Austria.
Part of that story is that Edie, in her later years, went to have a steak dinner. And the walkway to the steakhouse, the Ruth Chris Steakhouse, was cobblestones. And all of a sudden, she had this moment where she was back in Germany on a cobblestone street with all of these young children calling her names, yelling at her. And it was a moment where she obviously was very transported to a challenging experience. But the other part of that story, Edie, that you always share, which I think is so powerful, is that once after the war was over and you became a therapist, you worked with a German family in Germany, right? And the little boy runs and jumps on your lap and
calls me Oma.
Yeah. So it's just a question of, what are you being taught? What is happening in your childhood that leads you to become a Nazi? You're not born a Nazi. You're not born to hate. Edie loves to tell us people aren't born evil. They get taught it. And another thing that you say, Edie, that I think is really beautiful, and it has a lot to do with what you were saying earlier, is that there's a Mother Teresa and there's a Hitler inside of each of us. It's, what do we reach for? What are we taught to reach for? And that's something that it's not just to say that we all have that wonderful, loving part of us. We have that angry, violent part of us. And to say that that is all in us, it gives us the ability to look at our enemies not as somebody that is different from us, but just somebody that reached for a different side. And why did they reach for that side? What is the environment that they're living in that teaches them to reach for that side of themselves? Which gives us compassion for our enemies, which is what ultimately helped Edie to survive Auschwitz.
When the children were speaking German, they called us dogs, Hund. We were the dogs. And so I felt so sorry for the children, not hate, that they were brainwashed to hate me. And I think it is very, very good that someone like you is bringing up today anything that hopefully will not lead us to World War II and unfortunately, or anything that could happen. I work very hard at everyone I meet to really find the best in them, and the one that you could have done things differently. If you knew then what you know now, you would have done things differently. So forgiveness to yourself. It's a real big one.
Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful.
You can just embrace yourself and say, if I knew then what I know now, I would have done things differently, for sure.
So I have one last question that I wanted to ask you, and that's something that I ask everybody that I interview this way. And that question, I know it's something that can change over time, but I'd love to hear to you today, what does it mean to live well? What does healthy living mean to you right now?
That you do the same thing in a different way, not better or worse. It's well, let's do that. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Okay? And I think that's wonderful because you don't like someone better than yourself. Self-love is not narcissistic. It's something you accept that you're the parent to you and you know what's good for you to go and have a good night's rest rather than go to the bar and get drunk. And hopefully you even go to a meeting like that and find out that people are still drinking a great deal and to do everything in your power, which is limited. We all have limited power.
I really appreciate you making time to speak with me today and sharing your story. And congratulations on this book. It's really incredible.
Edie's journey is one where most 97-year-olds, she'll be 97 on September 28th, 29th, 28th? 29th, September 29th. And she has always said to me that she will never retire. And she makes it her life mission to continue.
It's my calling. I think I was put here to promote health and goodwill. And the teenagers, I think, need us. And we can do together much more than me alone or you alone.
I have chills. That's so, yes. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you both for being here. And for all of you who are listening to this recording, I appreciate your time and your energy. Please feel free to leave us your feedback on this episode. I love hearing from you, and it allows me to continue to bring guests like Dr. Eger. As always, you guys have a wonderful day. We'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. We'll see you next time. And just one more thing. I may be a dietitian, but I'm not your dietitian. The information in this podcast is meant for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical condition. It is also not a replacement for individual counseling. Always check with your healthcare provider for questions related to your own health and well-being.